Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Vincent and this is some sort of special bonus tutorial. In the past, well, it was actually exactly 2 years ago, I made a tutorial with C4D and with Softbodies where I really enjoyed putting something inside of a object and then skin it around, and then we have some nice motion. And this is actually this clip. And in general, I really love this approach. The visual language is really great. But at that time, we were really limited by the complexity of soft bodies. I actually made 2 different tutorials on my Patreon here, where we have one with cinema and one with X particles. And obviously the skin from X particles is way more interesting, and we have way more detail in here, which is interesting. And now we finally have the chance to do this in Cinema 4D because of the new update, the S26. We are having this great Cloth engine, and I'm having the video which I rendered in my DaVinci here. And actually there are 2 videos. The one. Still a few frames are missing to render in the studio. This renders actually quite long, so it takes a while. And also the music's from Jürgen Brandt, which fits quite nicely here. But in general, I'm like really impressed by the visual language, like the style of it. Yeah, this is definitely what I love to do, to wrap stuff around in plastic. It gets this garbage-like art collection feeling. So, but enough jibber jabber from my side here. So let's switch to Cinema 4D and let's see how we can do this. Basically, I will just reopen the same file which I did for this rendering, and I will copy some stuff out of there. So this is the whole baked simulation, and actually the baking was done fairly quickly, like 5 to 10 minutes for this complex scene. And yeah, this is how it looks in the end, and I really love it. So let's get rid of the skin for now, so you can see the objects in the inside. And these are really fairly simple objects. Some of them I already modeled, some of them are just a helix, and yeah, some of them are from my object packs from really back in the days, so really nothing fancy in here, and I don't want to go too detailed onto this object, so I'll just copy paste them all and let's create a new scene. So we have our objects here, and well, if you are into how to model these things, you can definitely check out my Patreon and learn something in there. So we want to reset everything because like right now the objects are actually lining up pretty good, so there's no intersection in between, and in general you would want to avoid intersection when you're working with soft bodies. Well, back in the days you had to avoid it. Now with the new Cloth engine, it's a bit more chill. So if there's a bit of intersection, your whole scene wouldn't explode. But so this is not how you would start your scene. Probably you would have some objects and they would all lie around onto the same surface. So let's get also rid of the tag because we want to recreate everything. And you can see, well, if you don't already know the structure from my patrons, you can see that I really love to work with a nice structure here. And for now, we can also hide the materials. They all have now obviously nice materials, but well, this is not the part of the tutorial. So let's start with the cloner, which is quite simple and always the same. Get the cloner, get the objects, put them into the cloner. And well, there are actually several ways to do what I'm doing now. Perhaps you could even try 2 things. Well, actually there's one guy which is really offsetted. Let's put it out of the cloner and see what's the problem with this guy. Wait, one guy, 2s are really offsetted. Actually, a few more. Right, let's undo the cloner and let's select all of them and let's go into the axis center and let's execute all the points to the center. So now the axis should be in the center, and also for this guy, and he has the center already in the axis. So let's put on the cloner again, and the cloner should be like super small. So let's go 4 by 4 by 4 centimeters, and I want 3 by 3 by 3 objects. So now they're all intersecting. And for now, we only need to create an old tag, which comes here up, the bullet tag and the rigid body. And in the rigid body, I want to follow the position and the rotation. So let's make it 12, or I don't know, 15 by 15, and let's press play and see what happens. And this is actually already what I want. So this should be my starting point for my soft body simulation. Then I only need to cache like 25 frames. So I reduce the timeline here, go back to frame 0, select the rigid body, go into the cache, and I want to bake all. So that's super quickly and perfect. And the thing is, if you don't bake it and you convert your file, then you will lose the position. So if I'm pressing now C to convert everything, and now I can delete the tag, and now everything's on the same position, and we can even scrub to the timeline and they won't move. So this is a really good starting point for our simulation here. Then let's duplicate this guy because I want to show you the second way, and let's select all of them again, put them back to the null. And by the way, I'm pressing Alt 0 for PSR reset. This is like the shortcut. It's really amazing. So I'm using the dynamic place tool, and this tool could be really amazing, but somehow for me, if my scenes are getting more complex, the tool doesn't know where objects are and it kind of stops working. So then I have to open a new scene, use the tool again and go back into the old scene, and then somehow it starts again. So for me, unfortunately, this is pretty buggy, but in general, this could be super nice because you can just, as you can see, drag and drop and you're done. So actually this step is even way easier than what we did before with the cloner and all the baking. And yeah, that's already it. You just have to select all of the things, select this tool, move them a little bit around, and now you have the position how they are. And as you can see, we can scrub the timeline and they are perfectly aligned and we don't have any intersections. So yeah, in this case, we shouldn't have done the cloner thing. This was way quicker, and I should try to implement this in my workflow, especially when the scene is so simple. So that's step one. As a next step, we need to create a volume builder and a volume mesher. This is also the default workflow, and I just stacked it around in the wrong order. So selecting the volume builder into the mesher, and I'm copying again my cloner, and for now I will hide the original clones and only want to have the remeshed. And what I want to do now is to create this transparent plastic skin. So I'm pressing MB on my keyboard to see the overall density of the mesh, and I think we can drop the voxel size even a little bit more and even a little bit more. 0.7 is a good thing here. So then we need to smooth the thing out and we need to dilate everything. But first comes the dilation, and I want to perhaps dilate it by 1 centimeter. And the smoothing, I don't need the Gaussian, perhaps the median is enough. And let's see, I'm not so sure about this hole here. This is probably not good, so perhaps we need a bit of more smoothing. And still I want to avoid this hole because I only want to have a skin and not like this intense geometry. So perhaps therefore we need to increase the dilation, and let's see, 1.5 is perhaps a value which would work. For example, if you have a value which is too big, and then let's make this guy transparent. So I will click X-ray, and now we can turn on the cloner, and now you can see that we have a bit of a distance between everything, and overall a bit of a distance is good. But if the distance is too far away and you had to dilate your object this much, you can counter that by creating a second dilation. And now we want to go minus, I don't know, -1 or something. And I think this is pretty good. So nothing's poking through my object, and let's make it NA to get rid of the lines. And also for now I will deactivate the X-ray view so I can even better see if there's some objects poking through our new skin here, and it looks pretty good. Nothing is poking through there, and we don't have any holes anymore in the skin, so I would say this is perfect and also a good time to save. So I just found a teeny tiny poke in there, so perhaps we need to dilate it a little bit more. So let's go by 2.1, and yeah, I think this is already good. So then what we need to do, this could be actually, I don't know, let's be safe, 2.2. Dilation 2.2. And we don't need this mesher anymore, so let's press C to convert this guy. And we can now create the remesher, which is now finally since 26 built in Cinema 4D. And it's the remesher. I used the tool before, which was called Quad Remesher, and it's literally the best tool I ever used. I used it every day, and it's so nice. So let's see. It looks all really good, and if you remember the stats of Softbody time, this would be really intense to calculate, but I think for our cloth simulation this is like easygoing, and this is probably enough. Perhaps we can reduce the intensity by the mesh like a little bit, and it's procedural, which is really nice. You can just change the values here, and I'll try 90% and see how it looks. And yeah, this looks nice. And in this case I'm pressing C to convert this guy again because I want to create UVs, because obviously the UVs are not correct. Let's delete this tag, and you can create the UVs in C4D, but for now I'm using Ryzen because I don't know, I'm pretty much used to it and it goes super quickly because I will just use the automatic UV unwrapping for a pelt. I just need to select some lines, cut, pack, and that's already it. So I'm pressing save and my UVs are now automatically transferred to Cinema4D, which is nice. And the UV doesn't have to be perfect because anyway it's just glass on top of it, so we need a little bit of imperfection which are not too much stretched, but that's it. So now let's make our timeline longer again. So we are back to 200 and let's put a simulation tag and a cloth tag only on the remesher, and I will hide the clones again because I really only want to focus on this guy, because right now I think this would still go in real time and it's dropping down. So we need to press Command D and go into the new tab simulations, and let's drop down the gravity to 0, and I think my overall scale can be a little bit smaller because my objects are really small. So I will drop down the scale to 5. I don't know if there's a change, but yeah, I could be more accurate. Then I know that I need to increase my substeps in my tests. I definitely also need some more iterations and some more collision, so we don't have any poking collision here. I also increased the dampening from 2 to 3, so a little bit less energies in the whole system and everything's a bit less jittery. Especially if we look back to the simulation, the rendering, you can still see that there's a lot of jittering happening. In this rendering, it's still quite good, I would say, but I also made another test rendering, and let's play this, and there's definitely jittering, especially to the end. If you watch to this bottom guy here and to the left, we have a lot of weird jittering, especially in the end. So I'm not yet sure how to get rid of these things. I think it has something to do with the collision and that the skin gets smaller and more tight. But in general, the dampening is helping us a little bit here. And I had a value of 3 in this test render, and perhaps this time we will try even 4. And then we have a smoothing iteration, which makes everything, I guess, smoother. And as far as I read, these iterations are easy to calculate, so they're not this intense. So I'll give everything 1 iteration here. Then what we need to create a turbulence to get at least a little bit of motion going on in there. And I know, well, let's press play and see what happens. And you can see the sky is really just flying away. And this is, I have the feeling that the intensity of 5 is stronger with cloth here. So let's drop this down to 1 and let's make a scale of 1000. This rare value, which worked pretty interesting for me. And now you can see we have some little bit of wobbly jobbly motion, which is quite nice, perhaps even too much. So let's drop down the strength to 0.5. And yeah, there's a bit of motion, which is nice. Perhaps then we can duplicate our turbulence and drop down the scale to a really small value. And let's see what happens if we crank this up. Now you can see this is jittering, which we don't want. So let's drop the value back to 0.5 and let's keep the scale at 100. So one is at 1000 and one is at 100. So we have a little bit of an interesting motion going on there. And yeah, this looks nice, but overall perhaps the big scale is still a bit too much, so I'll drop it down to 0.4. Nice, that's that. Then let's have a look onto the settings here. I want to have a balloon, and I don't want to have, like, 1 is the default value, which is not a overpressure or under pressure. It will try to maintain the overall size. So if we increase the number higher than 1, it will like balloon-like inflate, and you can see this was really intense. 6 is strong, and if we go with a small value like 0.1, we drain out the air and it gets sucked together like a, I don't know. And this like sucking together effect is what we actually want. I don't want to have this intense value. I would say 0.5 is something good. And I really want this object to be very, very soft because I want this motion, well, it should wrap around all the objects below. So therefore, the higher these values are, the more soft the object is. So I will try like, I don't know, 1000 or 10,000. And let's see how the skin is deforming with 10,000. And yeah, I really like it. It's definitely some, I don't know, water, soft jelly thingy, but perhaps this is 1 0 too much. Let's try out 1000, so the structure will be still a bit more maintained, and I think this looks pretty good. So let's save it, and let's also put on our X-ray again, and I'll change the view here, and I'll deactivate my clones again, and now I want to create a second tag. And for now I'm just copying it to the clone here, and this time they shouldn't be this soft. Perhaps let's try something by 50. I still want them to be pretty soft, and actually I don't want them to be deflated, I want them to be inflated. So I don't know, perhaps we can even try a value out of 3. And let's save and let's press play. And obviously nothing happens because I forgot to apply the tag. This doesn't work like the dynamic tag. It's not applying everything to the objects below. So we just need to select this object and apply copy tag to children, and now the tag is all copied. And now let's press play and see what happens. And now it takes a while to calculate the first frame to load everything into the GPU. And by the way, I had one scene where I had so much GPU VRAM used that I had the simulation, everything looked nicely, and in the end I couldn't render it in Redshift because the VRAM was full. So if you have these issues, you need to bake everything down as Alembic, and then you will be able to render it in Redshift. And now we have some issues. Let's pause. Well, let's pause and wait till something, hopefully it's not crashing. So cinema crashed, yet it's simulation, so it's always good to save. And we are now back to the step where we need to apply my cloth tag to all the objects. And one thing I wanted to talk about is that the default value of 1.5, you can imagine this as a collision margin, is way too much. And I don't want to go as small as we used to be, like the 0.01 for the dynamic text, because then we have some issues, but we can perhaps try out something like 0.2 or 0.2. And also for the skin itself, we need to definitely reduce the collision margin. And now I also want to deactivate the skin and just see how the object itself are moving if they are having an issue or something. So again, save. And now we are only simulating the inside part, and I'll press play and let's see if Cinema will simulate this time without crashing. Yeah, it looks good. So we have even 2.5 frames per second, which is really fast for so many objects in such a high resolution. Talking of high resolution, some of the objects can't be shown because they're glass, and I'm not using the new node system because it doesn't work. So therefore we will need to do something here. First of all, I want to deactivate the materials, and I'm pressing NB to see the lines. And to make it a little bit nicer, I will select all the objects and give them a random color. And now we can see way better what's happening, to see the deformation and everything. And they're all nice, flopsy and moving. And I would say they could get a little bit more pressure. Let's try out a value of 2.5. I think we had 3 before anyway. And also they should be a bit more bendable and flexible. And they should have a little bit less friction, so they can move themselves pretty good in the inside of the object. And let's see. Now everything gets a bit more deformed and more pressure, and I think this looks pretty good. That's exactly what I want. So let's press save and activate our skin again. Also, we need to activate the tag again, and let's press play. And the start was pretty good, but now we are having some issues. It's really getting slow. Also, it's getting a hiccup, and let's see if I can still even press the pause button. Let's also try escape. Sometimes escape works, but like rarely. Now we managed to pause, and you can see we have a lot of issues going on here. Objects are starting to collide through our skin. So this is a little bit like a back and forth, and overall I think what I'm trying here is really intense. This is where you should perhaps try a few less objects to have a fast workflow, but I wanted to have this huge thing. And also you can see my skin is getting really very tightly wrapped around this object, which looks amazing, but we will get these problems and these artifacts. Let's try to counter that a little bit. So first of all, our dresser shouldn't be that like intent by decreasing itself. So we are going closer to 1. So the pressure is not that strong here. Perhaps we will also increase the collision margin by 0.1. So we go to 0.3 now. And then I'm going Command D and go into my simulation tabs. And perhaps we will increase the collision passes from 3 to 5. And as a last thing, perhaps I can even, no. As a last thing, we will select all the objects from the inside and make only a pressure of 2. So we have less problems with the inflation and deflation. So we have a little bit more conservative values here. And let's see how it's going. And before in frame 15, everything was collapsing. And let's see, it definitely looks better. Oh, there's one guy coming through. Yep. And still our new skin is sitting so tightly on this whole mesh. Let's try to change values again. Let's try 0.9. So we have only very little negative pressure and even increase the collision tab one more and perhaps even to increase the iteration. So each sub-step gets way more accurate. I don't want to have too many of these sub-steps because I don't want them to get too stiff. The higher these values are, the more stiff the simulation is. And overall, our values here are already quite high and still we got 1 FPS, which is pretty nice. And overall, this is just a way of tweaking things, just changing some values, playing some, hoping for the best and seeing how it's going. And it's again getting better, but we have one guy escaping here in the back. And out of, which one was it actually? Was it the big orange one? Perhaps we can just select the orange one and I just have to deactivate the skin and scale it a little bit down so we have less conflict potential. And as a last step, also again reduce the pressure of the objects from the inside so we have less problems there. And perhaps you can even try to lower the friction like a little bit more so they can perhaps better slide on the skin and not poke through it. And let's try some frames. Also, probably this stuff is really hard to calculate because we have this kind of thin areas poking through the skin and there's some poking. Perhaps overall this shape is not the best because it's kind of complex to calculate, but now he's really getting it. We found some values where Cinema managed to compete the calculation, and I would say this looks really nice. The skin is very tightly wrapped around, the objects are deforming really nice, and we have some nice deformation for the turbulence and everything. And I would say at this point I'm pressing save and I will end this tutorial. I'm really hoping, or I'm looking forward to see what you are doing there, and if you do this technique, please tag me in your works, and just because I'm curious to see what designs you are coming up.